Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. This is Pursue 14Q, which is Hematology, General and Fundamental, and we are streaming live from MM Medical College, Solan, Himachal, Pradesh, via Kolkata. Very interesting, very catchy topic. Is it true? Spurious results in hematology analyzer. Talking about artifacts in hematology. Who else than the expert himself with multiple publications on the same topic? Dr. Naveen Kakkar, MBBS, MD from CMC Ludhiana, presently the professor in the Department of Pathology at the MM Medical College and Hospital, Kumarhatti, Solan, Himachal Pradesh, with key interest in hematology, analyzers, coagulation testing, hemoglobin disorders, hemolytic anemias and leukemias, with multiple publications, more than 80 in national and international index journal. Before I ask Dr. Kakkar to start, let me request all of you to keep your mic muted, your camera off, and please do not share your screen. With this, sir, we are all waiting. Please start, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Naveen. If you can please confirm if my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. Please start.
Okay.
Perfect.
Very good evening to all of you, Dr. Nadeem, Dr. Anita, and the group at Neelam Pathology for this opportunity again. And Dr. Nadeem keeps on calling me an expert. I am not. I'm still learning. These are just few things that I picked up on the way in my journey in hematology. So let's begin with this topic. Is it true? Spurious results in automated hematology analyzers. We see this not very infrequently. So at least in this the opening screen or the picture, what you see is a road, there's a pedestrian, there's a cyclist, there's a biker, there are cars, there's a van, and there's a plane on the runway. So doesn't seem to fit in. It's a rare scene, but in the labs we do see that, like I said, not very infrequently. So let's see how to sort it out, or at least with some case studies. A little announcement before we start. All PG students who have attended a minimum of 20 Pursue sessions by Neelam Pathology will be given 1 terabyte hard disk by Dr. Nadeem on behalf of the organizers.
Is it true?
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, my last slide had fake news. So a lot of you must be jumping already. 1 terabyte hard disk is coming, but it won't be coming. So just an example, if I gave you this news, a lot of you would have thought this is too good to be true. And sometimes it is too false to be false. So in the lab, we deal with both kinds of things. And hopefully today's examples on the case studies will give you an idea of what we expect sometimes. What we expect is unexpected many times. Let's look at that. So on a serious note, what if a patient with normal platelet count is given 6 platelet transfusions? Or a platelet with a normal coagulation profile is given 4 plasma transfusions, or if a platelet count of 5,000 is there but there is no platelet transfusion given to a patient, or in a patient with a normal potassium, you take potassium lowering measures. Now this is not hypothetical scenarios, these are real scenarios which have happened, some in front of me, some that I know of. You all know this banana chips. A lot of people like to have them very frequently. Many years back, traveling back from a conference in Kochi, I saw this on the roadside where we stopped to buy the banana chips. Automation in prime. Thankfully, automation came to hematology by Dr. Wallace Coulter many years back, 1953 to be precise. 3 parts, 5 parts, and what they give us. What do they give us actually? Flags, histograms that we looked at last time, and lots of fancy scatterplots regarding WBCs. I keep on repeating this slide. Each analyzer has its own personality. So if you're working in a lab, it is imperative that you know your analyzer well. How does it function? What are the flags? What are the indications it gives you? What histograms it generates? What are the interferences possible? Remember, like I keep on saying, interference will be common across instruments, but the way they respond to that is very different. That is why you need to know your analyzers. And so you have to befriend your analyzer, work with it. If there's a problem, sort it out. We cannot leave a problem and say, let's do a repeat sample and sort that out. You must know what caused the problem in that first sample. That learning experience only is the key to learning more. The best chip lies between our ears. The day we forget that, your best of machines will make a mistake for you. I dedicate this talk to this little guy, and we'll come back to him towards the end of the session today. So the outline: why this topic? What's the present scenario between the laboratory and the clinicians? How do we interact? What are spurious or artifactual results that this talk is all about? Why and how do they occur? And I'll take you through 13 case studies to make you understand what are the problems that we can anticipate. And remember, there are about 60 plus artifacts available, maybe more, but we'll look at more frequent ones. And what do the labs and clinicians need to do regarding these? So why this topic? We know that there are a lot of CBCs being ordered these days. There's an exponential increase in automation. Every small lab has a 3-part analyzer at least. We have an increasing number of artifactual reports arising out of this more usage of automation, but there is inadequate awareness of the technical staff, laboratory hematologists, and clinicians. We cannot blame the clinician. It is our job in the lab to sort this out. Some of these artifacts will have an enormous impact on patient care and decision making, some of them very, very critical. And the knowledge to picking them up is the key to identification and rectification. So if you do not know the possibility of artifacts, you will never pick them up. So in the present scenario, how do the clinicians and lab interact with each other? The clinicians think that the diagnostic labs are factories that produce fast, rapid, and accurate results. But we know in the lab that false negative and false positive results do occur. Some are recognized and some are not. Based on these things that are recognized or interpreted wrongly, you may have wrong clinical decisions, unnecessary surgeries, or even cancellation of a surgery. We know as a baseline, even in this world of increasing communication, there is poor clinician and laboratory communication. There are very few centers where there's a good rapport between the clinician and the laboratories in general. And this topic of artifacts is ignored in undergraduate and postgraduate teaching. And it's almost like this has to be part of the curriculum in a way, the way we are going with automation. So a lot of people think we are in a good zone with the clinicians, or the clinicians are in a good zone with us. The reality is this happens quite frequently in most hospitals, many times in a day sometimes, and depending on which side you are, the clinicians may be overpowering you sometime, or the lab takes over, but usually it's the clinicians who feel the labs is generating wrong results. Not entirely their fault in blaming that, because the labs need to sort out their issues as well, and we'll look at some examples by which this increasing knowledge of artifacts will help us with that. This is a statement given in the surgical textbook of Ackerman by Dr. Oscar and Rambo. I'll leave it for a few seconds for you to read. I added the few ml of blood that was not in his original because he was a histopathologist. And then he goes on to add, more dangerous to mankind is a pathologist with the same concept. So in the lab, if you're not asking for clinical information, you've just started digging your grave, because one day a wrong result will engulf you. So what are the questions to answer when we look at an artifact? Who has this artifact? No blood sample has an artifact. It's always a patient sample which has the artifact. You must remember that always. Then what is the clinical significance of this spurious result? Is it going to harm the patient? Is it going to cause no treatment falsely, or under treatment, or over treatment? And then what action should be taken? Should we repeat a sample, rerun the sample, etc. and so on? How do we communicate this result to the clinician? Most importantly, we must treat the patient and not the test. So an artifactual result when the patient is fine may not be acted upon all the time. The synonyms that you will find in the books or literature or on the web is spurious, fake, false, fictitious, or artifactual results. And we know in real life there are many examples of this. Difficult to pick up from the real one. And that's a problem in the lab also. Sometimes you are not able to detect, suspect, or pick an artifact, but we look at examples. What are the hints that will make you do that more consistently? What are these results? To summarize in very few words, the patient does not have the condition actually. For example, say, let's pick thrombocytopenia. So there is no thrombocytopenia in the patient, but the laboratory reports the condition based on his observation. So we found it on a slide or in the cell counter, and we gave it as thrombocytopenia. Implication: the clinician acts on this false report. He gives a platelet transfusion. So we have a loop which is really worrisome for the patient and the clinician, and should be for us also in the labs. A lot of variables play a role in generation of these spurious results. Why do they occur? Let's look at that. Pre-analytical factors, one of the most important areas of laboratory artifacts: difficult sampling, improper mixing of your sample, storage conditions. I'll show you one example of that. Time, if the sample is taken from a line, all that can affect the quality of your sample and cause spurious results. Instrument capability, faulty instrument or calibration. The anticoagulant use, especially EDTA, can cause a lot of problems sometimes in some patients. And actually the patient or sample characteristics. That something is true in the patient, the machine is not able to pick it up. The most important thing is chance favors the prepared mind. So if you are not aware of the possibility of artifacts in certain scenarios, you will always miss them. So it is good to know in which conditions you can expect some artifacts, or the clues from the histograms or the counts that will help you pick that up. That education is of prime importance in understanding and later on picking this up more consistently. I repeat this is no magic. Everybody can do that. We just need to be closely working with the analyzer. So what are the possible consequences of these results? If everybody is lucky, it may go undetected, except the patient. The patient is unlucky then. So the lab doesn't know it gave a wrong result, the clinician doesn't know it interpreted, but the patient gets a wrong management sometimes. There may be misdiagnosis, delay in diagnosis, no treatment given when treatment was required, or inappropriate treatments. Patient have been given steroids, bone marrow is done, spleen is taken out, given transfusions or not given transfusion when required in scenarios of artifacts. So it's an area of real concern. A lot of people feel now analyzer now costs 40-50 lakh plus, some of them, the new ones. Why are they still not smart enough to give us the artifact as a flag or pick it up early? Now remember, there are different technological capabilities of instruments, and they are patented technologies. So the Advia works on the basis of myeloperoxidase. So its strength is myeloperoxidase based differential on the WBC. Another counter will have a shortcoming in this area: inconsistent flags or sample characteristics. The same sample run in 3 different machines with a problem, maybe giant platelets, all of them may not generate the flags. Depends on the threshold set and the instrument characteristics. I look at an example of platelets. If there are large clumps or small clumps and the number of clumps, different counters will behave differently in flagging this for you. Some will flag consistently, some will be inconsistent, some may not flag at all, depending on what is aspirated at that time. Histograms may always not be abnormal. You can have completely normal histograms with good interference sometimes. So it is again important to know which scenarios will fool even the volume curve there. Expensive technology will limit extensive use. So if you have high-end instruments which can flag more, remember they're going to be in little centers, very small centers. So most centers will still have 3-part or the base 5-part analyzers. There's a lot of literature available on spurious counts on hematology analysis. This is part 2, white blood cells, red cells, hemoglobin, etc. There's part 1 also that talks about other cells. So a lot of literature available now. If Mahatma Gandhi was the father of the nation, here is the mother of hematology, Dr. Barbara Bain. Now reading her books and articles is how I've grown up in hematology, and she makes things so simple and understandable that your morphology actually leads to working with automation well. Our book on the blood cells, a practical guide, 5th or 6th edition running now, has an entire chapter devoted to problems with automation, detecting erroneous blood counts. So many tables in that which tells you interference about high hemoglobin, falsely high hemoglobin, falsely low WBC, etc. and so on. Not going to the details, but there's a lot of literature available and counter specific. Which counters cause interference in which parameters? It's very well worked out. A small example in the lab: your connection is loose. You have probably the soldering is not well, or a slightly loose connection here. You can get interference in your cell counts, especially platelets. There's good literature available on this. Not a very important area anymore because cell counters have, in fact, if I go back, suppose there's a loose connection, expect platelet interference, because this buzz of the electronic noise is what is counted as impedance as noise. If there's a platelet threshold lower, then you can have interference in the platelet count. We've had one episode in our hospital earlier in CMC where platelet counts were high, and all the engineer came and did was connected this well, took out the loose ends, and the platelet count, the spuriously high platelet count went off. So the noise, the buzz that the electronic interference creates is in the smaller volumes, the platelet volumes. So that can be one area of concern. We'll start with the case studies. We'll talk about platelets first. So like appendix, there's a small article on that, little organ, big trouble. So for the platelet also, it's a little cell but causes big trouble for the hematologists even now. So let's look at case studies. There are 13 of them. And I'll take you through photographs and the histories and how to sort it out. Case 1. Now, each case as it begins has a picture that somehow relates to the case. So let's see if you can make it out. It's an 86 years old patient with 95% burns, extensive burns. He died 48 hours later. The first sample we had at these counts, expected TLC to be high. There was marked thrombocytosis. Not unusual with a lot of traumatic injury. But the manual platelet count was 1,30,000. That's what the smear showed. You can see the platelets here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. There's one here faded up. So these are our platelets in red circles. But if you look in the background, there are small particles of the color of red cells, but very, very small. And smaller volumes are actually matching the platelet volumes. There they are. There are many more that are not marked. So you have red cell fragments, some budded off fragments, some elongated, some spherical, some almost spherocytic there, which are of the platelet size. What had happened? Because of burns, this patient had extensive burns. This patient had pyropoikilocytosis. Pyro is heat, poikilocytosis is the budded forms or the small fragments. There is extensive red cell fragmentation because of the extreme heat. The red cell fragments are of a size resembling platelets, hence they are counted by the counter as platelets. So remember this, in the last talk we looked at this histogram. The platelet and the RBCs are actually counted together, and that's how it's generated within the instrument. Your volumes less than 20-25 ml are counted as platelets and higher ones as red cells. So in this patient, what happened? Your red cells fragmented because of burns, and they cause volumes lower than 30, which fell into the platelet zone. So the platelets were counted more than normal. So here your red cell fragments being counted as platelets. And that's the histogram in this patient. That's the platelet histogram, that's a RBC histogram. So if you see, the shoulder here is actually going into the platelet zone, which is here. So what you're seeing in this part as a red cell shoulder is actually the bulge beyond the platelet zone. So these fragments were falling into the platelet zone and being counted as extra platelets. So what was this? A spurious thrombocytosis due to marked red cell fragmentation in burns. You've seen this container so many times with the purple cap, lavender cap. EDTA stands for ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid. I gave it a new name. Sometimes it behaves as error, dilemma, and trouble-causing anticoagulant. So let's look at case 2, which is related to EDTA. The BDS student with us with fever and sore throat for 2 days. There was no bleeding or petechiae. Previous EBC 1 month back was normal. His count now showed a normal hemoglobin, TLC of 4,600, normal differential, but with thrombocytopenia. No bleeding symptoms. This is what his blood smear showed, a phenomena which is very familiar to many of you. Your platelets sticking to the neutrophils there. That's platelet satellitism. There's an antigen antibody, the receptor binding is there. So in the presence of, this happens only in the presence of EDTA. So EDTA will cause the epitope sites on the surface of the neutrophils to open up, and the platelets come and bind with the receptors. So what is happening? As the stream is passing through the channel or the aperture, the platelets are being counted, not counted in fact, they are getting stuck to the WBCs and going as WBCs. So they are being undercounted because they are not there in the rest of the sample. Remember, this is not happening in the patient. This is an in vitro phenomenon. It's happening in the tube once the sample is taken. So there's nothing to worry within the patient. So whenever you have problem with EDTA, you take the help of sodium citrate and heparin. So repeat sample was done in EDTA again to reconfirm the findings, sodium citrate and heparin. This is what we got. Platelet count in EDTA was still low, 49,000 now, but citrate and heparin had showed normal counts. We gave the higher count obviously to 236,000, so there was nothing wrong with this patient. That's a repeat sample in citrate. You can see all the clumps or the satellite. There is no satellitism, no clumping. The platelets are all opened up and separate. So that's EDTA-induced platelet satellitism. Your answers are heparin and sodium citrate samples. Case 3, something sticking together. This is a 35-year-old lady with fever for 2 days. There was no bleeding. This case happened in 2003. She presented during the dengue epidemic at that time in the plains. Hemoglobin was 10.2, TLC normal, platelets were markedly low. 4 platelet concentrates were given that day when the report was dispatched. Platelet count on the following day was 10,000 still. 2 more platelet concentrates were transfused. Third day, still low. But third day, one of our senior residents brought the smear saying that they are large platelet clumps. So there was an accidental detection of large platelet clumps in the tail end of the smear. This was also seen in the thicker areas of the smear. We looked at the smears of the first 2 days. They had the same clumps that were actually missed, because in the dengue epidemic, everybody was sitting with piles and piles of only platelet counts. All they did was put a drop of oil, see no platelets or low platelets, and reconfirm the automated count. That is what happened. So third day, luckily, somebody saw this probably at scanner or low power and brought it to our notice. This is what was seen. This close to the tail, you can see the empty areas, more close to the tail, but large platelet clumps. Very, very huge. Repeat sampling for platelet count was now done in EDTA again, citrate and heparin. And we saw citrate showed a good count. Heparin also brought it up to normal count. EDTA was still low. That's the EDTA sample, clumping. That's citrate and that's heparin. Citrate and heparin showed no clumping at all. How do we differentiate the two? No, there is no need to differentiate. You'll know which smear you're looking at, but if I just enumerate that, the one that is clear is citrate, the one that shows a fuzz is heparin. So heparin stains like this. It gives you a background blue hue, slight hue to the plasma also. So heparin smears will look like this. That is why they are not used as routine anticoagulants. Citrate is pretty clear, but citrate is liquid, so you have to correct for the dilution factor and give the count. So what was this? This condition is EDTA-induced pseudothrombocytopenia, false thrombocytopenia, because EDTA induces so much of platelet clumping that the machines cannot count them. They are not coming into the machine count at all. Only the single ones will be counted, and these ones will be edited from the count or go into the WBCs. The prevalence is pretty low, 0.07 to 0.2%. Happens often in hospitalized patients with the autoimmune disorders, malignancy or sepsis, and the GP2B3 receptor is involved. Again, EDT opens up the epitopes on the surface of the platelets, and then they agglutinate or stick together. This phenomena can be transient or persistent. I know of 2 people in which lifelong they have this phenomena. There's no problem because it's in vitro, but only they need to be cautioned. So it is important once you pick this up to document well, and when this is found, and counsel the patient to ask for a smear each time they get a CBC done. Otherwise, one day they'll be falsely treated for thrombocytopenia like our patient was. Kanamycin, which is a reserve antibiotic for tuberculosis, not routinely used, may help for the EDTA sample. So in the EDTA sample, if you put kanamycin drops, I don't know the proportion, we did this once and it worked. We just put about 3 drops of the kanamycin injection after reconstitution, and the clumps in EDTA may open up. It's not completely predictable, but you can try this also. Although citrate and heparin will usually solve the problem. And as humans, we are not alone. This phenomenon has been described in animals. That's a report from a horse. So what's the perspective in this case? We gave 6 platelet concentrates in a patient who had a completely normal count, because if you look at those clumps, she probably had higher than normal count. The laboratory says this is a known phenomenon and can be missed occasionally. That's our excuse. The clinician says we acted according to the report, perfectly right. The patient says, why me? So the message from this slide is thrombocytopenia of any kind needs serious evaluation. Please exclude large platelet clumps, and labs need to be more vigilant, especially if there is no history of bleeding. So in this patient, 7,000, 10,000, no history of bleeding, dengue time, we should have been more careful. That's our mistake there. So in this scenario, again, the scanner view and the low power view will help more. So scan your slide for clumps in the tail especially, before you look at a thrombocytopenic slide more closely. So that was EDTA-induced pseudothrombocytopenia. Case 4. It's two patients, 52-year-old with SLE and Raynaud's phenomena, and a patient with rheumatoid arthritis and tuberculosis, jaundice for 2 weeks. So that's case 1 and case 2. And the easier things to notice here are bizarre values. MCV 110, 114, 104. These are also, MCV is believable, but MCH and MCHC are not. And RW less than normal, unheard of. Hematocrit and hemoglobin similar. There's a problem there. RBC count multiplied by 3 should be your hemoglobin. That's not true again. In both these cases, what is happening? The rule of 3 is violated, because of which the indices are bizarre. Even the RW is miscalculated in one of them. By chance, this is normal, may not have been. This clearly tells you, since I'm saying room temperature, this clearly tells you at this temperature, when this is happening, expect autoagglutination of red cells. So that is there. So the big ones are not a worrisome problem for us, because the big ones are going to be edited out by the machine. It is these clumps with 3 and 4, 4 and 5, which will be counted as large volumes and undercounted. Imagine 6 RBCs being counted as 1. So you're undercounting your red cells. If you're undercounting your red cells, your other values except for the hemoglobin will be wrong, and all the indices calculated will be wrong. That's a histogram in these two cases. That's normal. That's case 1 and 2. A very irregular flutter, almost sawtooth-like, going beyond 200 femtoliters. So here actually the histogram is telling you the diagnosis and also the indices. Before even you see the smear, you know what to expect. So you warm the sample at 37 for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes, and what do you get? Normal values. Everything back to normal, indices are normal here, same there. And if you look, your hemoglobins have not changed much, because hemoglobin is a function of spectrophotometric lysis within the machine. It is nothing to do with counting of red cells. That's why hemoglobins are consistent. TLCs have altered a little bit, but not much. Rarely you can have agglutination of WBCs also in the same sample, but unusual. So this is predominantly a red cell agglutination, and this solves the problem. So you do not release this report if you get this, because your diagnosis is there, but please warm it to 37, release this report. That's more accurate. So this was a 2 patients with spurious red cell parameters due to autoagglutination in autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Case 5, you know of the Maharaja or the Big Mac burger, related to that. So a 35-year-old lady with thrombocytopenia. Her hemoglobin WBCs were normal, platelets were 60,000. There was a clinical suspicion of ITP. Reports in 3 different labs on the same day were 60,000 in the first one, 74 and 92,000, varying counts. She was advised of bone marrow aspiration and referred to our center. The CBC that we did found normal SP and TLC. Platelets were still low, 68,000. But again, if you see 4 different reports, although these 2 match pretty close, in the same day. Blood smear showed large platelets, and our manual platelet count was about 1.2 lakhs. So if you look at your first count, 60,000, double that is the actual count, but still thrombocytopenic. So that's a smear from a normal patient, in which you see the neutrophil, and if you look at the platelet size, pretty much normal, 2 to 4, 2 to 5 femtoliter volume. And this patient, there are no lymphocytes here. These are all platelets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very large platelets. This one almost reaching to the red cell volumes. So large and giant plates were seen in this patient. A review of our automated CBC on the 5-part analyzer showed an MPV of 16.6. Normal in our lab was 7 to 11. So that was a 5-part analyzer, not the 3-part. It gave a large platelet flag 3+, the maximum. So the machine is indicating to us there are many large platelets, and she had a normal platelet scattergram that we just talked about. So let me put in the counts here. So the center one is a patient with normal platelets. The one on the left has secondary thrombocytopenia, probably drug induced. I don't remember exactly, but not macrothrombocytopenia. And the last one has mild thrombocytosis, 4.81 platelets. The thing to notice is, irrespective of the platelet count, normal, low, or high, in the scatter plots of the 5-part, this is the Advia analyzer, you see a density in the lower part. That's there, that's here as well, and here as well. There are some small dots on the upper larger volumes, but there's a density that you see, although the density is less obviously in the thrombocytopenic patient, medium, and more in this, but there seems to be a grouping of platelets in the lower zones. That's an important pattern to remember. The same the two patients with secondary thrombocytopenia and ITP now with platelet counts of 76 and 79,000, still you see the density here in the lower zones and some giant platelets. But look at the patient, two other patients except for the one that I've shown you, macrothrombocytopenia that I showed you the first case, and another patient, platelet count of 1,13,000. There is no density in the lower zones. It's a very stark comparison between those two scatter plots. No density, all scattered through, all scattered through. Here your giant platelets are here, and here, because there is so much of variation in giant platelets, many of them are plotted in the high volume zones. That's a very important pattern to recognize in patients with this condition. Just take you to a 3-part analyzer printouts. That's normal. So if you see the platelet histogram is going up, coming down into its own zone. But in these two patients with macrothrombocytopenia, two other patients, 42,000 count, 65,000 there, it rises but never falls. Goes into the red cell zone. Rises, continues in the high volume, and falls into the red cell zone. So what does this tell us? The histograms are speaking to us, and so are the 5-part platelet scatter plots, that there are many giant platelets than normal. That's the giant platelet shown there. So what is this condition? This is macrothrombocytopenia. Macro for large, thrombocytopenia obviously. Inherited thrombocytopenias, underdiagnosed condition, but there's a Bernard-Soler is one of them. There are lots of other syndromes, Mediterranean macrothrombocytopenia, Fechner syndrome, and so on. And they are usually, a lot of them are associated with the May-Eglin gene anomaly. So what was this? This is spurious thrombocytopenia due to large and giant platelets in inherited macrothrombocytopenia. Like I said, please read about this condition. It is underdiagnosed, but it's being picked up more and more in India now. What is the problem? Due to an inherited cause, the platelets are large and giant, almost RBC size. Most machines will undercount them because the volumes fall in the red cell zone. So you'll get a spurious thrombocytopenia, and you need to see a smear to make that correction to an actual count. Luckily, most Indian patients are asymptomatic, although there are some with bleeding disorders as well. Case 6 is a series of 14 patients that I presented in the last talk on histograms as well. 10 had bone marrow transplant and they were recovering in the bone marrow transplant unit. 4 were on chemotherapy for solid cancers. We had called from the clinicians regarding unusually high WBC counts. They were being followed for CBC every day because the counts were low. They were being monitored very closely. Repeat samples showed expected WBC count. That's the counts that I'm showing you. That's hemoglobin and platelet. You can ignore that. But look at the initial WBC count, leukopenic to normal to high counts. But look at our repeat samples, markedly leukopenic. This was actually the actual counts. This was falsely high. And the number in brackets is the number of times it was more than the actual count. So almost 40 times higher than the actual count, which was 100 in this patient only. So we reported 14 falsely high PLCs in the first go, and then on repeat samples, they were much lower, much lower. So what was the problem? These samples had fibrin clumps. If you see this in the tail, there are wisps of these, colorless wisps. These are fibrin strands. You can see them better here, individual strands. So once they are aspirated in the channel or through the aperture, they will be misread as WBCs. They can cause various interferences, but in our case, we also have WBC interferences. And important to screen the tail for this here. Again, in the tail, you can see blobs of this fibrin. These are too big to be aspirated, but if these are there in the sample, expect smaller one here and there, which will cause interference in your counts. That's a big one in high power. Those are normal histograms. In this patient, lymphocytes and granulocytes are almost equal. This patient has more lymphocytes than granulocytes. But I wanted to look at the ascending limb. It's a nice mirror image of the descending limb almost. Sloping rise. Well, if you look at The three patients on the left side had the spuriously low counts. The initial sample had a very straight ascending limb. So these patterns are abnormal. If you look at the WBC rise in the beginning, very symmetrical. This is totally asymmetrical, and almost, if you look at this angle becomes very, very acute here. It's a smaller angle and a bigger angle there. So this pattern we didn't pick up till the fifth or sixth case. Then we started noticing this pattern and put this collection together for a publication also. And on repeat samples, if you see, your ascending and descending limb are now matching with the normal ones. So these are clues in the histogram that tell you that this patient needs a smear or a careful screen of the smear. So what was this? Fibrin clumps causing spurious WBC count. Histogram will usually hold a clue. The peripheral blood smear is very helpful in confirming this. And most of these samples were either a slow draw or, at least in our cases, line samples, because these were patients on chemotherapy or BMT. They had a central line. The central line tends to develop fibrin on top as a part thrombogenic response of a foreign body, although they may say it is very inert, and this can cause these problems more often. So you can ask for a repeat sample from a venous line or a new vein rather than a line sample. So that was spurious leukocytosis due to fibrin clumps. Case 7, short one. This is a 10-year-old boy with pallor. The spleen and liver enlarged. He was suspected to have acute leukemia. The counts confirmed that. But unusual for a very high TLC and a leukemia, the platelet counts were maintained normal. The blood smear, however, showed only 30,000 platelets. So what were the rest? We'll look at that in the next slide. The smear showed 92% blast with a lymphoid morphology. Myeloperoxidase was negative. We advised the marrow, which was refused. Then we advised the flow cytometry. That time we did not have it in-house and he was referred elsewhere. That is what the smear showed. So these are the blasts, some nuclei there. These are 3 nuclei in a blast, and if you see, the blasts are shedding off budded cytoplasm here. And what you can see here is that I'm pointing out to 1, 2, 3, 4. These are not platelets. These are actually budded cytoplasmic fragments from leukemic blasts. Leukemic blasts are fragile, so they can shed off cytoplasm like that, and if it is of a size of a platelet, they can be counted as platelets. So this is spurious thrombocytosis due to cytoplasmic fragments from blast in acute leukemia. Actually not thrombocytosis because the count was barely normal, borderline normal. So this is a spurious rise in platelets because of cytoplasmic fragments in acute leukemia. This can happen in leukemias, myeloid also, monocytic also, and even lymphomas. So fragile cells can shed off the cytoplasm, which can be counted as platelets falsely. Case 8. It's a 35-year-old lady with infective endocarditis. This was in, I think, 1997 or 8. She had fever for 3 days. The sample was drawn in the emergency service. She was on follow-up regularly with us, but presented with this acute problem that time. Her CBC showed, again, marked thrombocytosis, more than 10 lakhs. I don't have a color picture right now, but that is what a smear showed. So if you look at, that's a platelet here. But if you look, these are rod-shaped structures. So these were actually bacilli. We found out later the blood sample reached the lab after 8 hours. This was in September, humid September, post-monsoon. There was bacterial overgrowth that caused the spurious thrombocytosis. So the small bacteria were actually being counted as platelets by the analyzer. True thrombocytopenia in this case could have been left untreated. Now we know if there is true thrombocytopenia requiring transfusion, if there is a false count given on the counter, remember we'll investigate a low count more than a high count. So if you think infection in 11 lakhs, you will accept it. So if the smear is not seen, you will probably say nothing to worry. But here her actual count was low and the bacteria were causing the spurious thrombocytosis. So that's spurious thrombocytosis due to bacterial overgrowth in a stored sample. There have been fungi or candida also reported in stored samples causing spurious counts. Case 9. That's a 35-year-old male with an ulcer in the left tongue. We thought query malignant. He had a renal transplant for end-stage renal disease and was on immunosuppression therapy. Excision biopsy was planned pre-op, but because the CBC was done, which showed thrombocytopenia, they held on and gave us a consult to look at the smear. What did the smear show? 2-3 things here actually. Small platelet clumps there, not very big, but platelet satellitism consistently. Here also platelet satellitism and there. And one more phenomenon which is extremely rare is platelet phagocytosis. Some of the neutrophils here show engulfment of platelets. There's one big one there, small one, 3 here, 2 here, and maybe 2 here. So what did this patient have? Actually 3 things. Clumps, not too big, satellitism, and phagocytosis in the same patient. Now, I do not have an explanation, but probably the immunosuppression that the patient was in was causing immune dysregulation or whatever, that was exposing the epitope sites for platelets and causing all this phenomenon. That's the only explanation. Otherwise, 3 things in one patient is really unlikely. So, clumps, satellitism, and phagocytosis. Again, our friends, heparin and sodium citrate. Now, in this case, the counts didn't improve much. If you look, your platelet counts are similar. Usually, we expect an EDTA phenomena to open up in heparin or sodium citrate or both, but it did not happen much. Satellitism disappeared, phagocytosis disappeared, but the clumps remained. So again, we don't know, probably the immune process is causing the clumping, but because there were enough clumps, we could report a normal count manually. But the phagocytosis and satellitism disappeared. So EDTA phenomena, all 3, 2 were sorted out by heparin and citrate, the third one even they resisted. Probably we could have tried ammonium oxalate, another anticoagulant. So that can also be tried if there is. We had one patient actually who was resistant to all. Not this case, but we had one patient who had 25, 30,000 platelet all the time in EDTA, heparin, sodium citrate, and even ammonium oxalate. There are rare cases of anticoagulant independent clumping in some patients. Mechanisms really not known. So that is the citrate sample and that's a heparin sample. If you see again, the platelet clumps are persisting, but there is no phagocytosis or satellitism anymore. And just to see, the citrate one is more clear. The heparin slide will give you a fuzz or the staining of the plasma. So it's a very different kind of staining that you can pick up once you see a slide consistently on stained with heparin, at least in these cases. So that's spurious thrombocytopenia due to platelet clumping, satellitism, and phagocytosis. Our answers have to be use heparin and citrate. And please, the books don't recommend this. They don't mention this specifically, but I always do an EDTA repeat sample again, just to reconfirm that phenomena and this happening EDTA. If you are not getting good quality EDTA vacutainers, then there may be issues within the anticoagulant or the amount in that particular tube sometimes. So it is good to document the EDTA phenomena again while taking a repeat sample for heparin and citrate. Case 10. There were a lot of sticking together of cells today. There's one more example. There's a male with chronic alcohol abuse history for many years. He had portal hypertension with epigastric pain. The CBC showed low hemoglobin, PLC, and platelets. The clinician considered hypersplenism. We had a look at the smear considering there was pancytopenia. This is what we got. So what is this? EDTA-induced leukoagglutination. The white cells are stuck together. So again, the very big ones will be edited out. They won't be counted at all. The smaller ones gradually will be undercounted. Single ones are counted more accurately. Most of the big ones will be edited out and not counted. So blood sample was redrawn in citrate and heparin. That's what we got again. Now, no points for guessing which one is heparin. The one on the left is fuzzed. This one is more sharp, the citrate one. The TLC was good in citrate, so initial one was 1900, so it's almost doubled. So that means it still had some phenomena of hypersplenism, but at least the TLC is higher now, much higher. So that's spuriously low white cell count due to EDTA-induced leukoagglutination. I hope you remember now what I said on the expanded form. Error, dilemma, and trouble causing anticoagulant. You had so many examples today itself. So potassium. Let's look at a potassium problem now. Going to a bit to biochemistry. With 2 patients, elderly, diagnosed to have essential thrombocythemia. I'm showing you the smear of one of them. That's a bone marrow picture. Proliferation of megakaryocytes and marked thrombocytosis with a lot of giant platelets, huge numbers. That's its CBC parameters. TLC was high in both and marked thrombocytosis, more than 20 lakhs in both of them. That's the biochemical parameters. Here the potassium was hitting 6 almost, and the other patient was 10. Now we went to the ward just to have a look at the file, and he was sitting up on the bed. You can't be sitting up with a potassium of 10, and you will be in some trouble if you're hitting 6. So what was the problem here? We tried to sort this out with a plasma potassium. Remember, what we do always in biochemistry is a serum potassium. So we did a plasma potassium in the first patient. The potassium came down to 3.8, not 5.9. It's a huge difference. This patient refused a repeat sampling, so the potassium was not done. But we knew it was much lower than this because he was hale and hearty. 10 means no survival. So what was the problem here? Let's look at some physiology. During blood clotting, a normal individual's platelet release minute amount of potassium. If you have marked thrombocytosis, this amount is significant and adds on to the estimated potassium. Remember, this is clotting, so it's a serum sample. Well, if you do a plasma sample, you'll get a more accurate potassium value. So this is a condition that we're talking about is pseudo-hyperkalemia, false rise in the potassium values. How do you diagnose this? If there is a serum and plasma difference of more than 4 milliequivalent, that minor, then you can call it pseudo-hyperkalemia. And usually you don't need to do this because if the potassium counts are normal, you don't worry. And if you have electrolyte imbalance, you know the clinical setting. Here the clinical setting was a hematological one. So very unusual. Just because we got chasing these two patients, we could actually figure out the cause later. I did not know of this phenomenon until we started working on why is the potassium so high and the patient fine. So there are more examples. Leukocytosis interference in clinical chemistry. So they're looking at hematological data to interpret clinical chemistry or biochemistry. Another example of artifacts of hypoglycemia with polycythemia vera. There are many of biochemical artifacts that we hematologists or pathologists are not aware about. It's a good idea to maybe somebody to work on this, maybe get a biochemist on board to look at hematology biochemical alterations. This is I feel again an underdiagnosed area. So in our patient, what did we have? Spurious hyperkalemia in patient with marked thrombocytosis. Remember, these are cells. Other cells could give rise to the same problem. There are reports with marked leukocytosis also causing hyperkalemia. So good idea to get a potassium done on the plasma than the serum if your patient have very high TLCs and the electrolytes are abnormal, like we saw in these two patients. They may not always be. You can't predict that if the count is more than 50 lakhs, that the platelets will always leak enough potassium. You can't predict. So the point I'm making is, in this setting, when you look at the biochemical parameters and something is unusually high, especially potassium, please do a plasma potassium there. Case 12, everything white. It's a 65 years old gentleman with fatigue and abdominal discomfort for 3 months. So abdominal discomfort in hematology, 3 months, we are pointing to a spleen. Spleen was 23 centimeters below the left costal margin. He was markedly pale, but the hemoglobin is not too bad, 10.8. TLC expectedly high, and because it is CML, we have thrombocytosis. That was a typical differential count of a chronic myeloid leukemia there. The peripheral blood smear. Now the clinician calls back and says the hemoglobin seems too high. He's seeing marked pallor, we are giving him 10.8. So what had happened? That's a normal sample if you leave it undisturbed or spin it. You have the red cell column and the straw colored plasma, more yellow in this case though. And this is a patient with CML. You have the red cell column but a huge white cell column. Count is 3.6 lakhs and a little bit of plasma. Now, before I go on to the manual hemoglobin estimation here, which we did, the problem is this number. So normally our red cell count is about say 4 to 5 million, 4 to 5.5 million. In that, WBCs are also counted, which are 4 to 11,000 or 4 to 10,000. So a few thousands in a few million does not make a difference. But here, when your white cell count is so high, that gets added on to your red cell count. Okay. Now, when you estimate a hemoglobin in this area, when you estimate your hemoglobin here, the white cells cause turbidity. Hemoglobin in the instrument is read spectrophotometrically after lysis of the red cells. So if you have white cells in that column or in that solution, they'll cause turbidity. And because the reading is spectrophotometry, turbidity causes high reading. So you'll get a spuriously high hemoglobin if the patient has a very high TLC. Again, we see so many patients with CML, you hardly seem to do this. It's a good exercise to, especially if your TLCs are very high, maybe about 4 lakh plus, just to try and see this if there's a pattern. Can you pick up a hemoglobin which is significantly different or not? So here in this case, you have a control and you run a manual hemoglobin on a cyan-meth hemoglobin method. But before running, we centrifuge the tube. So in this, once the hemolysis is out, we centrifuge the tube and you might get a small button at the end which is slightly whitish. This is all fragmented membranes of the white cells, and that is the white cell causing interference are now after centrifugation at the bottom. Now you can read the supernatant, and we got a repeat value of 7.6, 3.2 grams different than our initial value. So what are we dealing with? A spuriously high hemoglobin due to marked leukocytosis. It's a well-known artifact, but not very often worked up, because our prime worry in CML is more on the TLC, not the hemoglobin. Very similar names, similar packaging. So this is now take you to the Advia 120 analyzer, the 5-part scatter plots there. I'll just give, this is a normal one. I'll just show you what the zones are. That's neutrophil in this zone, lymphocytes, large unstained cells, monocytes here, eosinophils here. Now large unstained cells mean cells which are large and not stained by myeloperoxidase, because this is based on myeloperoxidase activity. Neutrophils have a high side scatter, so they will be plotted here. Lymphocytes have a forward scatter more, not side scatter, they are there. So the point I'm trying to make is large unstained cells in a normal individual, which this is usually less than 7 to 8%. This is 5.9. There may be some cells which are not picked up MPO very well, or large lymphoid cells. That's it. Nothing to worry. If you have a leukemia, especially in this case, let's say acute myeloid leukemia, there are neutrophils, yes. But if you look, there are lymphocytes, 13.6. But if you look in this zone now, large unstained cells, that population is 44%. So the instrument is actually telling us there are large cells which seem atypical or blastic, which do not have a good myeloperoxidase activity. Maybe lymphoid leukemia, maybe myeloid with less MPO activity. Now, this is the case that I'm working on next. This is a patient with myeloproliferative neoplasm on follow-up. The TLC is 15,000, hemoglobin is 9.3, platelets of 338. And on the differential, it gave us a large unstained population of 33.2. So if you can see, this is the lymphocyte area, less of neutrophils. But in this area, this population that the arrow is pointing to was 33.2. So if I look at the histogram or the scatter plot here, I feel there are blasts coming up in this patient. And we know MPNs can transform to acute leukemias. But the smear showed something else. If you look at this cell, it's much, much bigger than any RBC, much bigger than most WBC that you will know, even a monocyte, very high density, no nucleoli, hardly any cytoplasm. In fact, there's a slight wisp here. It's almost like tone of cytoplasm on this side. Other field, again, these are lymphocytes now, giant platelets here and there. And this is that, again, huge density, big cell, very dark nucleus, and a small bit of cytoplasm here. So these were the cells which are not blastic, but were causing a blast flag or at least a blast indication in the analyzer there. These were actually circulating megakaryocytic nuclei. Myeloproliferative disorders, essential thrombocythemia, myelofibrosis, CML can all have this. This patient has an unusual high number, which was being counted or flagged as blasts. So the thing to remember is they may have cytoplasm. Sometimes they may have cytoplasm, but very scanty, very high density of the nucleus, no nucleoli, and you can't place them in any white cell that you know of. So these are marrow elements coming out. So here the instrument is telling us probably blasts, but they were just these nuclei. And remember, these are MPO negative because there's no other material to stain. So they will be counted as unstained cells which do not take up the MPO stain. Last case. This is my favorite case in a way because I missed it in the first go, and I'll tell you the story of this. I call this the 5 o'clock case. This actually came at 5 o'clock in a lab some years back. 64 years old gentleman. He had epistaxis for 2 weeks. He had smoldering myeloma diagnosed 6 months back. M-band was not up to the diagnostic limit yet. The bone marrow plasma cells were high, 56%. His CBC showed thrombocytopenia. And the first slide that I saw at 5 o'clock, the background showed debris, and I thought these were artifacts there, lots of these granular artifacts. And my first instinct was, let's say artifacts, report the rest and go back home. And I was so lucky I did not do this. My temptation was this: I was almost about to get up. Then I just noticed one thing, which was that there was these dark neutrophil nuclei, but these debris were not sitting on the nucleus. Not on this side, they were in the plasma. So just as a stroke of luck, I said, okay, let's make another slide and have a look before I go. And the next slide showed very different picture. None of those artifacts, but you could now pick up these violaceous blobs in the plasma area or the background area. So not in the RBCs, nothing on the neutrophils. If I go back to the first slide, it's nothing compared to what we saw now. Very, very different picture suddenly. So meanwhile, the platelets that we got on our count was 72, and the patient then brought out a report, outside report that said 1,80,000. We sent it to our second analyzer in the main lab upstairs. We got nearly 3 lakhs. So very variable count, very, very variable count, and we didn't feel there were enough giant platelets for that interference. So we thought of something, separated the plasma, kept it at 4 to 8 degrees overnight in the fridge. Next day, this is what we got. That was a control plasma, and the patient plasma had a white precipitate coming up. This was cryoglobulins. He had smoldering myeloma, hepatitis C are all settings for cryoglobulins. So in the bone marrow, that's a group of plasma cells there. These are plasma cells again. But if you see in the bone marrow also, they are very granular and precipitatious look of the cryoglobulins. They can be, I've seen only 3 patients so far, and they can behave very differently, as we know. Very granular deposits here, very homogeneous, amorphous like, and something intermediate in the aspiration with the bone marrow. So that was spurious thrombocytosis due to cryoglobulins. Why do you get so much variable counts? Because depending on your counter, the temperature, they'll precipitate differently. So you can't have that because of cryoglobulins, my interference is there, so I'm getting 1,50,000. Another counter may give you totally different counts like we saw. And even while you make your slides, the temperature matters, the precipitation, the dirt on the slide, it will all affect the way the cryoglobulins precipitate. And that was the end of the case studies. Now just 2-3 slides on how do we tackle spurious results. You have to do it together. That's the lab and the clinician working together to sort this out. If I'm doing this presentation to a clinical group, I'll make the cat the clinician and the lab the mouse. But today it's pathology, so there we are. So what do the labs need to do? We need to educate our technical and medical staff in the lab. We have to take the initiative to educate clinicians who are really, really busy. We must have robust QC measure at each step so that if you get an interference, it should not be that your machine was faulty. Machine has to be working well. Then let it give you a faulty result. You'll be able to sort it out still. Most importantly, we must chase cases that don't make sense. So if you go back to the cryoglobulin example, I keep on saying I was just lucky that I decided to make another slide. If I was just a bit lazy, we would have lost that diagnosis. Anything that doesn't make sense, you're seeing more in a smear, less on the count, more on the automated count, less on the smear, please chase that. There will be a reason. Importantly, stop the blame game. Although we know pre-analytical variables are a problem, we can't blame the clinicians all the time. We need to keep that talking window open, have a good rapport with them to get best use of the lab and the clinical output. What do the clinicians need to do? They need to understand how labs function. They must give adequate clinical details to the lab. Imagine that patient with platelet count of 7,000 with dengue. If we were not given the history initially, but if you were given no history of bleeding, you would probably have been more careful, although that's no excuse. Discuss with the lab in case of unexpected, rather than saying the lab is wrong. If you're not getting a report fixing in or matching in with your expectation or the clinical examination, please talk to the lab. Look at that example with CML where the clinician told us hemoglobin does not match, please have a look. The clinicians also must educate themselves because they deal with so much of automation reports. They need to know at least common areas of artifacts that can give rise to an interference. And same, stop the blame game, stop blaming the lab. We all need to work together. I said we'll dedicate this talk to this guy, and to me, he is the patient in the loop. He's at the lower rung, but I think we all work for the patient all day and sometimes all night. And it is good that the clinicians and lab work together to give the best possible report. If there are errors which will be in the lab, if there are artifacts which will be always, we must be able to sort it out and give a final answer. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Barbara Bain for her teaching throughout the years. Dr. Bakul Dalal, he's in Canada, PGI is Chandigarh alumnus, whom I heard in 2 conferences, and that got me working in this area of spurious counts. And Dr. Britt, who used to visit CMC from Hillingdon Hospital, London. He inspired me to take up hematology. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Extraordinary presentation. Beautifully done. And yeah, the rat speaks it out. You know, everything is all about the rat. And in the quality control system, we consider rat as responsibilities, authorities, and tasks. And I think that sums it out. In the lab, the rat is really the fun which you have to run after. Wonderful presentation, sir. And this is something which we all need to learn from. So many things which we must be missing on a day-to-day basis. The CML, the high hemoglobin, the spurious counts of platelet is a real bother for everybody.
Right.
But as you rightly said, we need to chase it up rather than doing the blame game. We blame everything onto the collection and the pre-analytical areas without even giving an introspection to our own systems and lack of knowledge. Today, you have really shown us the light to things, where all things can really change, starting from the beginning of how the platelets can vary till the end, how the cryoglobulins can come into picture. And not only have you told us exactly where the issues are, you've also highlighted how to sort out those issues, which I think for the young people of today's practice is very, very important, because nobody teaches these things and nobody thinks about learning them. It's only when you come into practice and you find yourself in a dead end. This lecture, I think, will be a very big eye-opener for everybody and would be recommended for everybody to listen to it again and again. I'm so thankful to you, sir, that you took this up on such a short notice and decided to dedicate this to the responsibilities, authorities, and tasks, the great rat which you are run after. Thank you so much, sir. Would request you again to please share the PDF. It will be a big, material for everybody to learn from. Wonderfully done, sir. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Naveen. Thank you.
Right, sir. Take care then. Bye-bye, sir.
Bye, sir.
Good night, sir. Okay.